The auctioneer's hammer came down like a death knell, and Natalie Crawford felt her stomach drop as she stood on the courthouse steps in Trinity, Nevada, watching everything her father had built being sold piece by piece to strangers who had never broken their backs working that stubborn desert soil. It was June of 1884, and the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the crowd gathered in the dusty street, their faces a mixture of pity and hunger as they eyed the Crawford homestead like vultures circling a dying animal. "Next item," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the square. Miss Natalie Crawford herself, contracting her labor for a period of no less than 3 years to satisfy the remaining tax debt of $47.16. Natalie's cheeks burned with humiliation as she stepped forward. At 22 years old, she had imagined many futures for herself, but standing on an auction block like property had never been among them. Her father had died 6 months ago from pneumonia, and her mother had passed when Natalie was just a girl. She had tried to keep the farm running alone, but between the drought and the tax collectors, she had been fighting a losing battle. The crowd murmured, some men looking interested, others uncomfortable with the proceedings. Indentured servitude was legal in Nevada territory, though it left a bitter taste in most decent people's mouths. But the law was the law, and Natalie owed money she could not pay. $47, someone called from the back. $47.50, another voice countered. Natalie kept her eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance, trying to separate herself from the moment. She wore her best dress, a faded blue calico that had been her mother's, and her dark hair was pinned up properly despite everything. If she was going to be sold like livestock, she would at least maintain her dignity. $50, a deep voice said, and something in its tone made Natalie look up despite herself. The man who had spoken stood apart from the main crowd, leaning against a hitching post with an ease that suggested he had all the time in the world. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his work shirt, and he wore a weathered brown hat that shadowed his face. But even from a distance, Natalie could see his eyes were a striking blue-gray, and they were looking at her with something that was not pity or hunger, but rather a careful assessment. $55, someone else bid, a rancher Natalie recognized as Samuel Hutchins, a man known for working his hired hands half to death. $100, the tall man said, straightening up. The crowd went silent. That was more than double what anyone had expected the bid to reach. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $100, do I hear 110? Samuel Hutchins scowled but shook his head. No one else spoke. Sold to Quincy Graham for $100. The hammer came down again, and just like that, Natalie's fate was sealed. She watched as Quincy Graham made his way through the crowd to pay the clerk. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 27 or 28, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His hands were calloused as he counted out the money, but his movements were precise and controlled. When the transaction was complete, he walked over to where Natalie stood with the county clerk. Up close, she could see a scar running along his jawline and the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he squinted into the sun frequently. He met her gaze directly, which surprised her. Most men who bought indentured contracts treated their new workers like they had already stopped being fully human. "Miss Crawford," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed almost absurd given the circumstances. "I am Quincy Graham. I own the ranch adjacent to your father's land." "Former land," Natalie corrected, her voice sharper than she had intended. "I believe that was also sold today." "It was," Quincy agreed. His voice was calm, measured. "I bought that too, 300 acres for $200. The tax office was practically giving it away since no one else could make that soil produce anything worth having. Natalie felt tears prick at her eyes but refused to let them fall. Her father's land, sold for a pittance. Everything he had worked for gone. "I suppose you will want me to start work immediately," she said, lifting her chin. "What are my duties to be? Cooking, cleaning. I should tell you I am stronger than I look. I can handle farm work if that is what you require." Quincy studied her for a long moment, and Natalie had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing far more than she wanted to reveal. "How about we start with a conversation?" he said finally. "I have my wagon over there. Let me take you out to the property and we can discuss the arrangement properly." It was not a request exactly, but it was not a command either. Natalie nodded stiffly and followed him to where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to a pair of well-kept horses. He offered his hand to help her up, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was warm and steady, and he released her as soon as she was settled on the wagon seat. They rode out of Trinity in silence, the town giving way to scrubland dotted with sagebrush and Joshua trees. The land here was harsh and unforgiving, beautiful in its own stark way but deadly to those who did not respect it. Natalie had grown up learning every trick her father knew about coaxing life from this desert soil, and still it had not been enough. "Your father was Benjamin Crawford," Quincy said after they had been traveling for about 20 minutes. "It was not a question. He was. I met him a few times. He seemed like a good man, hardworking, honest." Natalie looked over at him sharply, searching for mockery, but his expression was serious. "He was the best man I ever knew," she said quietly. "This land killed him. He worked himself into an early grave trying to make it produce, and in the end, he died knowing he was going to lose everything anyway." "The drought has been hard on everyone," Quincy said. "But some land is harder than others. Your father's acreage has good bones, though. There is a spring on the northern section that could be developed, and the southern fields have good soil if you can get water to them." "If," Natalie repeated bitterly. "That is always the question, is it not? If the rains come, if the well does not run dry, if the taxes do not increase again." Quincy nodded slowly. "It is a hard life out here. I will not pretend otherwise." They crested a small rise, and Natalie's breath caught despite herself. Spread out before them was the Crawford homestead, the small house her father had built with his own hands, the barn that was listing slightly to one side, the fields lying fallow and golden in the afternoon sun. Beyond it, she could see the boundary line where Quincy's property began, marked by a split-rail fence in better repair than anything on her father's land had been in the last year. Quincy's ranch house was larger, a solid 2-story structure with a covered porch and several outbuildings in good condition. She could see cattle grazing in the distance and what looked like an extensive vegetable garden near the house. He drove the wagon past his own property and up to her father's house. The front door hung slightly ajar, and weeds had begun to grow up around the foundation. Natalie had not been allowed back here since the tax office had seized the property 2 weeks ago, and seeing it abandoned like this made her heart ache. Quincy pulled the horses to a stop and set the brake before turning to face her. "Miss Crawford, I want to be straight with you about something. I did not buy your contract to get a servant. I have a woman who comes in from town twice a week to help with cooking and cleaning, and I can manage well enough on my own otherwise." Natalie frowned, confused. "Then why did you buy it? And why buy my father's land?" "Because I have a proposition for you," Quincy said. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, and Natalie noticed for the first time that he seemed almost nervous. "Your father's land borders mine on 2 sides. Together, our properties would make a much more viable ranch than either one alone." That spring I mentioned. It is right on the boundary line. With some work, we could run irrigation to both properties. The southern fields on your land combined with my northern pastures would give us room to expand the cattle operation and still grow crops. That sounds very good for you, Natalie said carefully, but I do not see what it has to do with me. You own both properties now. Legally, yes, Quincy agreed. But morally, Miss Crawford, you have been working this land since you were old enough to walk. You know every inch of it, every quirk of the soil where the water flows after a rain, which sections get the best sun. That knowledge is worth more than any deed. He leaned forward, his blue-gray eyes intent on hers. What I am proposing is that we farm it together, not as master and servant, but as partners. You bring your knowledge and your labor, I bring my resources and my land. We work together to make both properties thrive. Natalie stared at him, certain she must have misheard. Partners? But I am indentured to you. I have no legal standing, no rights. That contract says you owe me 3 years of labor, Quincy said. It does not specify what kind of labor or under what conditions. If I say your labor consists of managing half the farming operation as my partner, who is to argue? He paused. And when the 3 years are up, we can draw up a proper legal partnership if things work out. Or we can part ways and I will sign your father's land back over to you, clear of all debts. It was too much to process. Natalie felt like the world had tilted sideways. Why would you do this? You do not even know me. I know you tried to run this place alone after your father died, Quincy said quietly. I know you were out working the fields from dawn to dusk, trying to do the work of 3 men by yourself. I know you went to the bank 4 times trying to negotiate a loan or an extension, and they turned you away each time because you are a woman. I know you are strong and stubborn and you do not give up easily. How do you know all that? Because I was paying attention, he said simply. My ranch is right next door, Miss Crawford. I saw you out there. And I thought about offering to help, but your father had his pride and I figured you did too. But then he died, and I watched you try to do everything alone, and I thought about saying something then, but I did not want you to think I was taking advantage of your grief. He put his hat back on and looked out across the land. Then the tax office posted the auction notice, and I realized if I did not act, someone like Samuel Hutchins would buy your contract and work you into the ground, and someone else would buy this land and probably let it go to waste. So I made a decision. Natalie's mind was racing. It could be a trick, some elaborate scheme to get free labor while making her think she had some agency. But as she studied Quincy's face, she saw no deception there, only a careful sincerity. What exactly would this partnership entail? She asked slowly. You would live in your father's house, Quincy said. I will provide materials to fix it up and get it properly weatherproof again. You would manage the farming operations on both properties, deciding what to plant and when, how to allocate water, all of that. I would continue managing the cattle side of things, and we would share the work that overlaps like fence repair, building maintenance, that sort of thing. And the profits, split evenly after expenses, he said without hesitation. I will keep proper books, and you can review them whenever you want. We will make decisions about major purchases or changes together. It sounded too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. Natalie waited for him to add conditions, to mention expectations beyond what he had stated. But he just sat there, waiting for her response. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Quincy agreed. Would you like me to leave you here for a bit? I can come back in an hour or so. Natalie nodded, and Quincy helped her down from the wagon. He touched his hat brim again in that gesture of respect, and drove back toward his own property, leaving her standing in front of the house that had been her home her entire life. She walked slowly up to the front door and pushed it open. Inside, everything was just as she had left it, though dust had settled over the furniture and the air smelled stale. The kitchen table where she and her father had eaten 1,000 meals. The rocking chair by the fireplace where he had sat in the evenings, reading his Bible or just staring into the flames. Her own small bedroom with its narrow bed, and the quilt her mother had made. Natalie sank down onto her bed and finally let herself cry. She cried for her father, for the life she had lost, for the fear and uncertainty of the last 6 months. She cried for the humiliation of standing on that auction block, and for the death of the future she had imagined for herself. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out but clearer somehow. She stood and walked through the house, really looking at it. The roof needed patching in several places. One of the windows had a cracked pane. The back door did not hang quite right. But the bones were good, as Quincy had said about the land. Her father had built this house to last. She walked outside and surveyed the fields. They were overgrown now, but she could still see the careful rows her father had plowed. She walked to the small family cemetery on the hill where both her parents were buried and stood there for a long time, the wind whipping at her skirts. "I do not know what to do, Papa," she said aloud. "This man, Quincy Graham, he is offering me something that seems impossible. A chance to keep farming this land, to make something of it. But what if it is a trap? What if he is not who he seems?" The wind offered no answers, but as she stood there, Natalie thought about the alternatives. If she refused Quincy's offer, she would still be indentured to him, and he could simply assign her whatever work he chose. Or he could sell her contract to someone else, and she would have no say in the matter at all. At least this way, she would be here, on her father's land, doing the work she knew and loved. And if Quincy was being honest, if he truly meant to treat her as a partner, well, that would be more than she had any right to hope for given her current circumstances. She heard the wagon before she saw it, and by the time Quincy pulled up to the house again, she had made her decision. "I accept your proposition," she said as he climbed down, "but I have some conditions of my own." Quincy raised an eyebrow. "I am listening." "First, I want it in writing. All of it. The living arrangements, the profit sharing, the promise to return my father's land to me after 3 years. I want a contract that is just as legal as the indentured servitude agreement." "Agreed," Quincy said immediately. "We can have a lawyer in Trinity draw it up." "Second, I want to be involved in all decisions about the property, not just the farming. If you decide to sell cattle or buy new equipment or anything else that affects our partnership, I want to say." "That is fair," Quincy nodded. "Anything else?" Natalie hesitated, then pressed on. "I want your word that you will treat me with respect, that you will not use the indentured contract to force me into anything beyond what we agree to here and now. I know I do not have much leverage, but I need to hear you say it." Quincy's expression grew serious. He met her eyes directly and said, "Miss Crawford, you have my word as a man and as a Christian that I will treat you with respect and honor our agreement to the letter. I am not looking for a servant or anything else. I am looking for a partner to help me build something worthwhile out here in this difficult land. That is all." There was something in his voice that made Natalie believe him. Maybe she was being foolish, but she had to trust someone, and Quincy Graham had at least shown her more consideration than anyone else had in months. "Then we have an agreement," she said, extending her hand. Quincy looked surprised for just a moment, then a slow smile crossed his face. He shook her hand firmly, his grip warm and solid. "Partners," he said. "Partners," Natalie echoed, and felt the first small flicker of hope she had experienced since her father died. Over the next few days, Natalie began to understand what she had gotten herself into. Quincy was a man of his word. That much became clear immediately. He brought over lumber and shingles and spent 2 full days helping her repair the roof on her house. He worked alongside her without complaint, taking direction when she suggested a better way to approach something and offering his own expertise where it made sense. He also brought her provisions from his own stores, refusing to let her pay for them. "Consider it an advance on the partnership," he said when she protested. "We will settle accounts after the first harvest." They rode into Trinity together that Saturday to meet with a lawyer named Robert Dawson, a serious young man with spectacles who listened carefully to their requirements and drew up a contract that spelled out everything they had discussed. Natalie read it 3 times before signing, and Quincy did not rush her. As they rode back to the ranch, Natalie found herself stealing glances at her new partner. He was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, not the oppressive silence of someone who resented conversation. When he did speak, his words were thoughtful and measured. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they neared home. "Of course." "Why are you not married? A man with a ranch like yours, I would think you would have a wife and family by now." Quincy was quiet for a moment, and Natalie worried she had overstepped. But then he said, "I was engaged once back in Kansas before I came west. Her name was Elizabeth. She was beautiful and refined from a good family. But when I told her I wanted to move to Nevada and start a ranch, she gave me an ultimatum, her or the dream." "And you chose the dream," Natalie said softly. "I chose honestly," Quincy corrected. "I told her the truth about what kind of life it would be out here, how hard and uncertain. And she told me she could not live that way. So we parted, and I do not blame her for it. She knew what she wanted, and it was not this." He glanced at Natalie. "What about you?" "No bow waiting in the wings," Natalie laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "I had a few young men court me when I was younger. But once they realized I would inherit a struggling farm and came with the obligation to care for an aging father, they all found other girls to marry. Men want wives who will be assets, not burdens." "Then they were fools," Quincy said bluntly. "A woman who knows how to work, who is not afraid of hardship, who has loyalty and courage, that is worth more than any dowry." Natalie felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the shadows cast by her bonnet. "Thank you," she said quietly. They fell back into silence, but something had shifted between them. Some small barrier had come down. That night, as Natalie lay in her own bed in her father's house, she thought about the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been facing complete ruin. Now she had a home, a purpose, and a partner who seemed genuinely decent. It was not the life she had imagined, but perhaps it could be a good life nonetheless. The summer days fell into a rhythm. Natalie rose before dawn and worked on assessing the fields, planning what could be salvaged and what would need to wait until next season. Quincy worked on developing the spring, digging channels, and building up a reservoir that could feed both properties. They met each evening to discuss the day's progress and plan the next day's work. Often, Quincy would bring food from his supplies, and they would eat together on Natalie's porch, watching the sun set over the desert. Sometimes they talked about the work, but other times their conversations wandered to other topics. Books they had read, places they had been, dreams for the future. Natalie found herself looking forward to these evenings more than she wanted to admit. Quincy had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh, and he listened to her opinions with genuine interest. He never talked down to her or dismissed her ideas because she was a woman. When they disagreed about something, they debated it as equals until they reached a compromise. One evening in late July, a violent thunderstorm rolled in just as they were finishing their meal. The sky turned greenish-black, and lightning cracked across the horizon like spider webs. "I should get back before this hits," Quincy said, standing up from the porch step where he had been sitting. But even as he spoke, the first fat drops of rain began to fall, and within seconds it became a downpour. Wind whipped across the yard and thunder shook the house's frame. "You cannot go out in this," Natalie said, having to raise her voice to be heard over the storm. "You will be soaked through before you get halfway home." Quincy hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of staying. "I do not want to compromise your reputation, Miss Crawford." "There is no one here to see, and I trust you," Natalie said firmly. "Please, just wait until the storm passes. You can sit in the kitchen while I go to my room. Everything will be perfectly proper." After another moment's hesitation, Quincy nodded and followed her inside. Natalie lit a lamp and set it on the kitchen table, then excused herself to her bedroom. She left her door slightly ajar, not wanting to seem like she was being inhospitable but maintaining the propriety Quincy was concerned about. She lay on her bed listening to the storm rage outside and the quieter sounds of Quincy moving around in the kitchen. She heard him add wood to the stove, heard the scrape of a chair, and what sounded like pages turning. He must have found her father's Bible. The storm lasted for over an hour, and by the time it finally passed, it was full dark. Natalie emerged from her room to find Quincy sitting at the table, reading by lamplight. "I am sorry for keeping you trapped here," she said. He looked up and smiled. "No apology necessary. It was a good storm. We needed the rain. Would you like some coffee before you go? I could put a pot on." "That would be nice, thank you." As Natalie worked, she was aware of Quincy watching her. When she glanced over, he looked away quickly, but not before she caught something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. "Can I ask you something?" he said as she poured the coffee. "Of course. Do you ever regret accepting my offer? Do you wish you had taken your chances with someone else buying your contract?" Natalie sat down across from him and wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "No," she said honestly. "I was frightened at first, I will not lie about that, but you have kept every promise you made. You have treated me with respect and fairness. I count myself fortunate that you were at that auction." Quincy nodded slowly, and something in his expression eased. "I am glad," he said quietly. "I know the circumstances that brought us together were not ideal. But I have to say, Natalie, I have enjoyed these last few weeks. Having someone to work alongside, to plan with, to share the challenges and the small victories. It has made me realize how lonely I had become without really noticing it." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep voice sent a small thrill through her. "I have felt the same," she admitted. "I thought I would hate being beholden to someone else, but it does not feel that way. It feels more like having an ally, a friend." "I would like to be your friend," Quincy said, meeting her eyes. "If you will let me." "I would like that too," Natalie said softly. They sat there in the lamplight, drinking their coffee and talking quietly until well past midnight. When Quincy finally left to walk back to his own house under a sky full of stars, Natalie stood on the porch and watched him go, feeling something warm and complicated blooming in her chest. August came, and with it the hard work of preparing the fields for fall planting. The spring development was complete, and water now flowed steadily through irrigation channels to both properties. It was back-breaking work, but the sight of water running through the parched earth filled Natalie with a fierce joy. Quincy had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the cattle and the heavier work, brothers named Tom and William Hart. They were good workers, respectful and hardworking, and they took Natalie's instructions without complaint. She appreciated that Quincy had made it clear she was his partner, not just another hired hand. One afternoon, Natalie was working on clearing rocks from one of the fields when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see a group of riders coming up the road, 4 men she did not recognize. They reined in near where she was working, and something about the way they looked at her made her instinctively reach for the rifle she kept nearby when working alone. "Afternoon, miss," the lead rider said. He was a heavy-set man with a red face and small, mean eyes. "We are looking for Quincy Graham. He around. He is working the northern section," Natalie said, not lowering the rifle. "What is your business with him?" "That is between us and Graham," the man said. His tone had gone cold. "But since you mention it, maybe you can help us." "Graham owes us money and we have come to collect." Natalie frowned. That did not make sense. Quincy kept careful books and he had never mentioned any debts. "I think you are mistaken." "No mistake," another rider said. "We loaned Graham $500 last year to buy cattle. Payment was due last month." "I do not believe you," Natalie said flatly. "Quincy would have mentioned something like that, and if he did owe you money, you would have papers showing it." The lead rider's face got redder. "You calling us liars?" "I am saying I do not believe you have a legitimate claim," Natalie said, raising the rifle slightly. "And I think you should leave." The men exchanged glances, and Natalie saw their hands drift toward their gun belts. Her heart was pounding, but she kept the rifle steady. "What seems to be the problem here?" Quincy's voice came from behind the riders, and Natalie nearly sagged with relief. He rode up on his horse and Tom and William were with him, both armed. The odds had suddenly evened considerably. "These men claim you owe them money," Natalie said. $500 for cattle." Quincy's expression went hard. "That is interesting, since I have never seen any of these men before in my life." He looked directly at the lead rider. "You want to try that story again, or would you rather just ride out before this gets unpleasant?" The lead rider spat into the dust. "We heard there was a woman living out here alone, thought she might be easy pickings. Guess we heard wrong." "Very wrong," Quincy said, his hand resting on his gun, "and the lady is not alone. She has 3 armed men who would take it very personally if anything happened to her. Now, I am going to count to 10, and then I am going to assume you mean us harm and act accordingly." He did not even make it to 3 before the riders wheeled their horses around and took off at a gallop. Quincy dismounted quickly and strode over to where Natalie stood. "Are you all right? Did they touch you?" "I am fine," Natalie said, though her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. "Just talk, nothing more." "Talk can turn into action quickly," Quincy said grimly. "I should not have left you out here alone. From now on, someone stays with you when you are working the far fields." "I can take care of myself," Natalie protested. "I know you can," Quincy said. "You proved that today, but why take chances? This is partnership, remember. We watch out for each other." Tom and William had ridden closer. "Want us to track them, boss?" Tom asked. "Make sure they keep riding." "Yes," Quincy said, "but do not engage unless they double back. Just make sure they are truly leaving the area." The brothers nodded and rode off. Quincy turned back to Natalie, and she saw genuine worry in his eyes. "I mean it," he said quietly. "The thought of something happening to you, of those men hurting you." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "You are not just my partner in this business, Natalie. You have become important to me. Your safety, your well-being, they matter." Natalie's breath caught. "Quincy." "I know the timing is probably terrible," he continued, the words coming faster now. "I know you are still indentured to me, which makes any kind of relationship between us complicated at best. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. These last 2 months, working beside you, talking with you every evening, watching you breathe life back into this land, I have." He took a breath. "I have fallen in love with you, Natalie Crawford, and I needed you to know that." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Natalie stared at him, at this good, honest man who had saved her from ruin and treated her with respect and kindness. who had just confessed his feelings with the same straightforward sincerity he brought to everything else. "I am in love with you too," she whispered, and saw his eyes widen. "I think I have been for weeks now, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself. I thought maybe it was just gratitude or loneliness or something other than real feeling. But Quincy, when I saw those men today and thought about what could have happened if they had been more determined, the only thing I could think was that I might never get to tell you how I felt." Quincy closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Natalie breathed. His lips met hers softly at first, a gentle question. But when she responded, pressing closer, the kiss deepened into something more passionate. His arms came around her, and she felt safe and wanted and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "I know we cannot marry until your indenture is complete," he said. "It would not be legal, and people would question whether you had a choice in the matter, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable. When the 3 years are up, if you will have me, I want to marry you properly." Natalie laughed, dizzy with happiness. 3 years seems like a very long time to wait. "Then we will make every day count," Quincy promised. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. When Tom and William returned an hour later, they found Quincy and Natalie sitting on the porch of her house, holding hands and talking quietly. The brothers exchanged knowing looks, but said nothing beyond reporting that the troublemakers had ridden straight out of the territory and showed no signs of returning. That evening, as they sat together watching another spectacular sunset, Natalie felt a contentment she had not known since before her father's illness. The future was still uncertain, the work was still hard, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But she was not facing them alone anymore. She had a partner in every sense of the word, and she had love. "What are you thinking about?" Quincy asked, squeezing her hand gently. "I am thinking about how strange life is," Natalie said. 2 months ago, I was standing on an auction block feeling like my life was ending. Now I am sitting here with you, feeling like it is just beginning." "Some endings are just new beginnings in disguise," Quincy said. "My mother used to say that. Wise woman. She was. She died when I was 16, but I still think about her advice." He paused. "I wish she could have met you. She would have liked you." "I wish I could have met her too," Natalie said. "And I wish my father could have known you. He would have been glad knowing someone was looking after me, looking after his land." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Quincy said, "I have been thinking. The 3-year wait before we can marry, it seems arbitrary given that we both know what we want. What if we did something now, something private, just between us and God? Not a legal marriage, but a commitment ceremony. A promise to each other that we will honor when we can make it official." Natalie considered this. Like a betrothal, more than that. A true marriage in everything but the legal paperwork. We would not live together, would not share a bed, nothing that would compromise your reputation. But we would be committed to each other, exclusively, with the full intention of making it legal as soon as possible. "A marriage of intention," Natalie said slowly. "I like that. Yes, Quincy, let us do that." The next Sunday, they rode out to a beautiful spot near the spring they had developed together. Tom and William came as witnesses, and they stood under the wide Nevada sky while Quincy read from his mother's Bible. They spoke vows to each other, simple promises of love and faithfulness and partnership. Quincy had carved 2 matching rings from a piece of oak, and they exchanged these symbols of their commitment. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, Natalie felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you," she said. I will love you all the days of my life." "And I will love you," Quincy replied. "Through every hardship and every joy, through drought and harvest, through all of it. We are bound together now, Natalie." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and Tom and William cheered. It was not legal, and no government or church would recognize it. But in that moment, Natalie felt more married than any formal ceremony could have made her. The rest of that year passed in hard work and quiet happiness. The fall planting went well, and the winter was mild enough that they did not lose any cattle. Natalie and Quincy continued to live separately, maintaining propriety, but their love grew deeper with each passing day. They learned each other's rhythms and quirks. Natalie discovered that Quincy liked to sing old hymns while he worked, though he stopped when he realized anyone could hear him. Quincy learned that Natalie had a stubborn streak a mile wide when she thought she was right about something, and that she cried during storms because they reminded her of the night her mother died. They had their disagreements, of course. There was a memorable argument about whether to invest in more cattle or better equipment, which ended with both of them shouting before Natalie stormed off. But they always came back together, always found a way to compromise and move forward. Spring came, and with it the evidence that their partnership was working. The fields produced better than they had in 5 years. The cattle herd was healthy and growing. The ranch was thriving. On a warm evening in May, almost a year after Natalie had stood on that auction block, Quincy came to her house with a serious expression on his face. "I have been thinking," he said. "What we have here, what we have built together, it is working, better than I ever hoped. And I know we agreed to wait the full 3 years before making anything official, but I talked to the lawyer, Robert Dawson, and he says there is legal precedent for ending an indenture contract early if both parties agree and the debt is satisfied." Natalie's heart started beating faster. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that you have more than fulfilled your obligations under that contract," Quincy said. "You have worked harder and smarter than anyone I could have hired. You have made this land productive in ways I never could have alone. As far as I am concerned, you have earned back every penny I paid for you and then some." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "This is a release of indenture. I had Dawson draw it up. If you sign it, you are a free woman. No obligations, no debts. And then, if you want, if you still feel the same way about me that I feel about you, I would like to ask you properly to marry me." Natalie took the paper with shaking hands. She read through it quickly. It was all there, simple and clear. She would be released from the indentured servitude contract immediately. Her father's land would be deeded back to her, free and clear. She would be completely independent. "And if I sign this," she asked, "what happens to our partnership?" "That is up to you," Quincy said. "We can continue as business partners if that is what you want. We can dissolve the partnership entirely if you would rather strike out on your own. Or," he took a breath, "or we can become partners in a different way, husband and wife, full legal partners in everything." Natalie set the paper down and moved to stand directly in front of him. "Quincy Graham, I have been yours in my heart since last summer. A piece of paper did not make me yours, and releasing it will not change what I feel. But I want that freedom. I want to come to you to marry you, knowing I am choosing it freely with no legal obligation clouding things." Relief and joy flooded Quincy's face. "Is that a yes?" "That is absolutely a yes," Natalie laughed. "Now give me something to sign with." They signed the indenture release right there, and then Quincy dropped to one knee in her kitchen, looking up at her with love shining in his eyes. "Natalie Crawford, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my companion for the rest of my life?" "Yes," Natalie said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married 3 weeks later in Trinity's small church, with what seemed like half the county in attendance. Natalie wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Quincy had ordered from San Francisco, and she carried wildflowers from the ranch. Quincy wore a new suit and looked so handsome that Natalie could hardly concentrate on the ceremony. Robert Dawson stood as Quincy's best man, and a woman from town named Sarah Mitchell, who had become a friend to Natalie over the winter, served as her attendant. Tom and William sat in the front row, grinning like they had personally arranged the whole thing. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her thoroughly enough to make some of the older ladies fan themselves, and Natalie did not care one bit. The reception was held in the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Natalie had never been much for dancing, but Quincy swept her around the floor with surprising grace. "You have been holding out on me," she accused. "I did not know you could dance." "My mother insisted I learn," Quincy said. "She said a gentleman should be able to lead a lady properly." "I thought it was nonsense at the time, but I am grateful for it now." "I am grateful for everything," Natalie said softly. "For you, for this life, for the second chance I never thought I would get. We get to build our future together now," Quincy said. "Whatever we want it to be." They stayed at the reception until late, surrounded by well-wishers and friends. But eventually they excused themselves and rode back to the ranch under a canopy of stars. They had made the decision to live in Quincy's larger house, and Natalie's father's house would be converted into quarters for ranch hands or eventually for family. That night, for the first time, they shared a bed as husband and wife. Quincy was gentle and patient, and Natalie discovered that physical love was another way their partnership could deepen and grow. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Quincy said, "I have a confession to make." "Oh." "When I saw you on that auction block, before I ever spoke to anyone about it, I knew I was going to buy your contract. And I told myself it was because it made practical sense, because combining our lands was smart business. But I think part of me knew even then that I was already falling for you." Natalie propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You were not the only one affected," she admitted. "When I heard your voice in the crowd, making that first bid, I looked up and saw you. And even in the middle of the worst moment of my life, I thought you were the most handsome man I had ever seen." Quincy laughed and pulled her back down against his chest. "We are a pair of fools," he said affectionately. "The best kind of fools," Natalie agreed. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch continued to thrive under their joint management. They expanded the cattle operation and brought more land under cultivation. The irrigation system they had built became a model that other ranchers in the area tried to replicate. In the spring of 1886, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling poorly for a few weeks, and when the doctor confirmed her suspicions, she rode home as fast as she dared and found Quincy working on repairing a section of fence. "We are going to have a baby," she announced without preamble. Quincy dropped his hammer and stared at her. Then a grin broke across his face so wide it looked like it might split his head in two. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "Careful," Natalie protested, but she was laughing too. "You are going to make me dizzy." "I am going to be a father," Quincy said wonderingly. He set her down gently and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though the answer was obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Quincy said. He kissed her softly. "You have given me everything, Natalie. A home, a partner, a purpose. And now a child. I could not ask for more." Their son was born in December, a healthy baby with his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Benjamin Quincy Graham after both their fathers and called him Ben. Watching Quincy with their son was one of Natalie's greatest joys. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, and he approached parenting with the same thoughtful care he brought to everything else. When Ben was 2, Natalie became pregnant again. Their daughter, Emily, was born in the summer of 1889, with red gold hair that matched neither of her parents but must have come from some distant relative. She was fierce and stubborn from the start, and Quincy said she had clearly inherited her mother's determination. Life fell into a rhythm of work and family, of seasons turning and children growing. Ben proved to have his father's steady temperament and his mother's love of the land. By the time he was 6, he was following Quincy around the ranch, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and the business of ranching. Emily, meanwhile, was drawn to the farming side of things. She loved to help Natalie in the garden, her small hands learning to coax seeds into life. She had a natural understanding of growing things that reminded Natalie painfully and joyfully of her own father. In 1892, when Ben was 6 and Emily was 3, Nevada was still a territory, rough and wild in many ways, but Trinity was growing, becoming more civilized. The railroad had come through, bringing easier access to markets and supplies. The ranch had grown from a struggling operation to one of the most successful in the region. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard, Quincy said, "Do you remember what I said to you that first day? When I bought your contract, you said we would farm the land together," Natalie recalled. "And we have," Quincy said. "We have built something remarkable here, Natalie, something that will last beyond us, that our children and their children will inherit." "It is more than I ever dreamed possible," Natalie admitted. "When I stood on that auction block, I thought my life was over, but it was really just beginning." "Some of the ranch hands were talking today," Quincy said, "about how strange it was that we run the ranch together, that I consult with you on every decision, that you handle the books and the planning as much as I do." One of the new men asked if I was not worried about letting a woman have so much control. "What did you say?" Natalie asked. "I told him that you were not just a woman, you were my wife and my partner. And that this ranch succeeded because we worked together, because we combined our strengths and covered each other's weaknesses. I told him that any man who was too proud to recognize what his wife brought to the table was a fool who deserved to fail." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, Quincy could still surprise her with his steadfast support. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I am only speaking the truth," Quincy said. He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "You are the best decision I ever made, Natalie Graham, the very best." As the years continued to pass, they added more children to their family. A second son, Thomas, in 1894, who had his mother's dark eyes and a quiet, thoughtful nature. And finally, in 1897, another daughter they named Rose, who was small and delicate but proved to have a will of iron. By the turn of the century, Ben was 14 and already working the ranch like a man grown. Emily was 11 and could calculate crop yields and water allocation as well as her mother. Thomas was 6 and showing an interest in the mechanical side of things, always taking apart and putting back together anything he could get his hands on. And Rose, at 3, was the darling of the entire operation, charming everyone from ranch hands to visiting cattle buyers. Natalie and Quincy had aged along with their family. There was silver in Quincy's dark hair now, and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Natalie's own hair had streaks of gray, and her hands bore the calluses and scars of decades of hard work, but they were happy. More than happy. The love that had begun on an auction block and grown through a partnership built on mutual respect had deepened into something unshakable. They still worked side by side every day. They still made decisions together. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they had built together. One evening, in late summer of 1900, they stood at their father's and mother's graves on the hill. Natalie placed fresh wildflowers on the markers. "I wish they could have known you," she said to Quincy. "Both of them." "I think they would have approved," Quincy said. "Your father wanted this land to thrive and his daughter to be happy. We have accomplished both." "We have," Natalie agreed. She looked out across the ranch, at the neat fields and fat cattle, at the solid buildings and the irrigation channels that made life possible in this desert land. "We have built something wonderful here." "We have built a legacy," Quincy corrected. "Something that will outlast us both." That fall, they held a celebration for the ranch's 20th anniversary. They invited everyone who had been part of their journey, from Robert Dawson, the lawyer, now serving as a territorial judge, to Tom and William Hart, who had moved on years ago but came back for the occasion with their own families. At the celebration, Quincy stood up to make a speech. 20 years ago," he said, "I attended an auction in Trinity. I bought land that day and I entered into a business partnership, but I got so much more than I bargained for. I found a partner who was smarter and stronger than I ever could have hoped for. I found a wife who has stood beside me through everything, and together we found a life worth living." He raised his glass. "To Natalie Graham, who showed me that the best partnerships are built on equality, respect, and love. To my wife, my partner, and the best person I have ever known." The crowd echoed the toast, and Natalie felt her eyes fill with happy tears. She stood and went to Quincy's side, and he wrapped his arm around her waist. "We did this together," she said to the crowd. "Every bit of it, and that is how we will continue, together." The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Natalie danced with Quincy, and then with each of their children in turn. She looked around at the life they had built, at the friends and family gathered to celebrate with them, and felt a profound gratitude. Later, as they prepared for bed, Quincy said, "I have been thinking about that speech. Oh, I did not say everything I meant to say. I wanted to thank you, Natalie, for taking a chance on me, for trusting me when you had no reason to, for building this life with me. You could have refused my offer that day. You could have demanded I assign you to housework and kept yourself separate. But you chose to be my partner, and that choice has made all the difference." Natalie turned to face him fully. "I chose you," she said. "And I would choose you again, every day for the rest of my life. You saved me, Quincy, not just from the auction block, but from a life of loneliness and struggle. You gave me partnership and respect and love. You gave me everything." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had found each other through impossible circumstances and built something beautiful together. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Nevada became a state, and the wild frontier gradually gave way to more settled civilization. But the ranch endured, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked together with love and mutual respect. Ben grew into a fine young man and eventually married a schoolteacher from Trinity named Catherine. They gave Natalie and Quincy their first grandchildren, a pair of twin boys who were as wild and energetic as their grandfather had been at that age. Emily proved to have her mother's head for business. She took over much of the farming operations and instituted new techniques that increased yields even further. She married a quiet man named David, who loved her fierce independence and never tried to dim her light. Thomas went east to study engineering and came back with ideas about modernizing the ranch's infrastructure. He married a girl from Boston who took to ranch life like she had been born to it, surprising everyone, including herself. And Rose, the baby, grew into a beautiful young woman who inherited the best qualities of both her parents. She was strong and smart and compassionate, and she eventually became a teacher, dedicating her life to educating the children of Trinity and the surrounding ranches. Through all of it, Natalie and Quincy remained at the heart of the operation, working together even as their children and grandchildren took on more responsibility. They were in their 60s now, slowing down but not stopping, still partners in every sense of the word. One evening in the spring of 1910, as they sat on the porch of the house that had been Quincy's and then become theirs and then became the heart of a family empire, Natalie said, "Do you ever think about that day, the auction?" "Sometimes," Quincy admitted. "Usually when I look at everything we have built and marvel at how it all started." "I was so frightened that day," Natalie said. "So angry and humiliated. But you know what? If I could go back and change things, I would not, because that day led to this, to us, to all of it." "I knew," Quincy said softly. "Knew what?" "That day at the auction, when I first saw you standing there with your chin up and your eyes blazing, refusing to let them break your spirit. I knew right then that you were extraordinary. I told myself I was making a practical business decision, but the truth is I was already half in love with you." Natalie laughed, the sound mixing with happy tears. "After all these years, you can still surprise me." "Good," Quincy said, grinning. "Keeps things interesting." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had done countless times over the decades. The land stretched out before them, green and thriving, dotted with cattle and crossed by irrigation channels that brought life to the desert. Their children's homes were visible in the distance, built on different sections of the ranch as the family had grown and spread. "We did well," Natalie said finally. "Did we not?" "We did better than well," Quincy replied. "We built something that will last. Not just the ranch, but the family, the legacy. We showed our children what a real partnership looks like, what love built on respect and equality can accomplish." "Do you think they understand how rare what we have is?" Natalie asked. "I think they do," Quincy said. "Ben told me the other day that he tries to run his household the way we ran ours, with Catherine as his partner in everything. And Emily is already teaching her daughters that they can do anything, be anything. Our grandchildren are growing up knowing that women and men can be equals, that marriage should be a partnership. That is a legacy worth more than any amount of land or cattle." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, their children and grandchildren began to gather for the weekly family dinner that had become tradition. The house filled with noise and laughter, with children running and adults talking, with the smells of good food and the warmth of family. Natalie watched it all with a full heart. From the auction block to this moment, her life had been a journey she never could have predicted. But every step had been worth it. That night, as they lay in bed, Quincy said, "I love you, Natalie Graham. I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you to the end." "And I love you," Natalie replied. "My partner, my husband, my heart. Thank you for choosing me that day." "Thank you for saying yes," Quincy said. "For taking a chance on a partnership with a stranger, for building this life with me." They fell asleep holding hands as they had done for nearly 30 years, secure in their love and in the knowledge that they had lived their lives well. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Natalie and Quincy gradually handed over most of the day-to-day operations to their children, though they remained involved in the big decisions. They spent more time with their grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom, teaching them about the land and about life. When Quincy turned 70, the family threw a massive celebration. People came from all over Nevada to honor the man who had built one of the most successful ranches in the state. But in his speech that evening, Quincy deflected the praise. "I did not build this alone," he said firmly. "Every brick, Every fence post, every decision was made in partnership with my wife. Natalie is the foundation of everything we have accomplished. She is the strongest, smartest, most capable person I have ever known, and I have been blessed beyond measure to share my life with her. The crowd applauded, but Quincy was not finished. I want our grandchildren to hear this and remember it. Your grandmother was sold at auction to pay debts. She could have been broken by that experience. She could have given up or given in to bitterness. Instead, she took the hand I offered and built a partnership that became a marriage, that became a family, that became a legacy. She turned the worst day of her life into the foundation of something beautiful. That is strength. That is courage. And that is what I want you to remember about her. Natalie was crying openly now, and Emily and Rose hurried to her side. But they were happy tears, grateful tears. To be seen so clearly, to be loved so completely, even after all these years, it was more than she had ever dreamed possible. As the celebration continued, Natalie found herself surrounded by grandchildren asking for stories about the old days, about how she and Grandpa had met, about what life had been like when Nevada was still wild and dangerous. She told them the truth, not sugar-coating the hardship or the fear she had felt that day on the auction block. But she also told them about the partnership that had grown from those difficult circumstances, about learning to trust and to love, about building something lasting with hard work and mutual respect. The most important thing, she told her oldest granddaughter, a bright girl of 16 named Alice who wanted to go to college, is to never let anyone tell you what you cannot do. Your grandfather could have treated me as a servant, but he chose to see me as an equal. And I chose to prove him right. Whatever you want to do with your life, Alice, make sure you choose a partner who sees your worth and respects your abilities. That is the foundation of any real success. Alice hugged her grandmother fiercely. I will, Grandma, I promise. The years continued their steady march. Natalie and Quincy celebrated their 35th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and a few great-grandchildren. The ranch had grown beyond anything they had imagined that first day, now encompassing several thousand acres and employing dozens of workers. But through all the growth and change, the core of it remained the same: partnership, respect, and love. When Quincy fell ill in the winter of 1915, at the age of 73, Natalie nursed him with the same fierce determination she had brought to everything else in her life. She sat by his bedside, holding his hand, reminding him of all the things they still had to do together. You cannot leave me yet, she told him. We still have to see Rose married. We still have to meet the newest great-grandchildren. We still have too much living left to do. Quincy squeezed her hand weakly. My determined Natalie, he said with a faint smile, always arguing with reality. Reality can wait, Natalie said firmly. And somehow, through sheer force of will and good medical care and perhaps a bit of divine intervention, Quincy recovered. By spring, he was up and moving around again, though he tired more easily and had to rely on a cane. You called me back, he told Natalie one evening as they sat on the porch watching yet another sunset. I was ready to go, ready to rest, but I heard your voice telling me we were not finished yet and I could not leave you. Good, Natalie said, though her voice shook. Because I am not ready to say goodbye, I will never be ready for that. We will have to face it eventually, Quincy said gently. But not today. Today we are here together, watching the sun set over the land we built. That is enough. Rose married that summer, to a veterinarian from Reno who loved animals almost as much as she loved teaching. It was a beautiful wedding, held at the ranch with half the state in attendance. At the reception, Quincy and Natalie danced together one more time. They moved slowly, carefully, Two people who knew each other so well they could anticipate every movement. Around them, their family watched with tears in their eyes, seeing the love that had endured through more than 3 decades. "Thank you," Quincy said as they swayed to the music. "For every day, every moment, for the partnership and the love, for our children and our life. Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for seeing me," Natalie replied, "for respecting me, for loving me as an equal. You changed my life, Quincy Graham." "We changed each other's lives," Quincy corrected. "That is what real love does." They lived for several more years, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They saw Alice graduate from college, the first woman in the family to do so. They met more great-grandchildren. They celebrated the ranch's 40th anniversary with another massive party. And through it all, they remained partners. Even when Quincy's health declined and he could no longer work the ranch, Natalie consulted with him on every decision. Even when Natalie's own strength began to fade and she needed help with tasks that had once been easy, Quincy was there with advice and support. On a quiet evening in May of 1920, as they sat on the porch holding hands and watching the sun set one more time, Quincy said, "I am tired, Natalie." She knew what he meant. Not tired from the day's work, but tired in a deeper way. Tired of fighting age and illness, ready to rest. "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I am tired too." "We had a good run, did we not?" Quincy said, smiling at her. "The very best," Natalie agreed. "No regrets." "No regrets," Quincy echoed. "Just gratitude, so much gratitude." They sat together as the light faded, holding hands as they had done thousands of times before. The land stretched out before them, green and thriving, a testament to everything they had built together. Quincy passed peacefully in his sleep that night, with Natalie's hand in his. He was 78 years old, and he left behind a legacy of love and partnership that would endure for generations. Natalie lived for 2 more years, long enough to see the ranch continue to thrive under her children's management, long enough to hold another great-grandchild, long enough to know that everything she and Quincy had built would last. She was laid to rest beside him on the hill near her parents' graves, overlooking the land they had farmed together, the ranch they had built from an impossible partnership. Their combined headstone bore a simple inscription, "Partners in all things." The ranch continued long after they were gone. Ben's grandchildren and great-grandchildren still worked the land, using the irrigation system Quincy and Natalie had built, farming the fields she had planned, carrying on the traditions they had established. And every generation heard the story of how it all began, with a woman on an auction block and a man who saw not a servant but a partner. They heard about the contract that became a partnership, that became a love story, that became a legacy. They learned that real love is built on respect and equality, that the strongest partnerships are between equals, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the greatest blessings. The story of Natalie and Quincy Graham became a family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It was a reminder of where they came from, of the courage and determination of their ancestors, and of the power of choosing love and partnership over convenience and tradition. And on quiet evenings, when descendants of Natalie and Quincy sat on that same porch watching the sun set over the Nevada desert, they sometimes felt the presence of those who had come before. The love that had built this place, this family, this legacy, had not died with them. It lived on in every sunset, every harvest, every child born into the family that Natalie and Quincy had begun, from an auction block in Trinity, Nevada, in June of 1884, to a thriving ranch that spanned generations. Their story was one of transformation and partnership. It was proof that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings, and that when two people commit to facing life as true partners, there is nothing they cannot accomplish together. The end of their individual stories was simply the beginning of a legacy that would endure forever, a testament to the power of love, respect, and partnership in building a life worth living.